What is driving the madness is today's presentation. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, Voltaire. This is a very, very important thing to note, and it's always been going on throughout time. It's really about the ideologies that people hold, the ideas, the way they see the world is going to really dictate their behavior. So we're going to look around this particular conversation, and today we're going to look at the life of Joe, which is Joe's on the right. So this is one of the metaphors, or one of the things that we base the project around, is a conversation that goes on between Jane Bloggs and Joe Bloggs. Jane Bloggs wants to completely challenge the narrative. She doesn't believe a lot of things that she's been told, whereas Joe pretty much believes most of the narrative, and he's following and he's complying. Now, when Jane and Joe are having conversations, they get into very charged and strained conversations. And whenever Jane presents a fact, it just bounces back. And what we really want to understand is, as we go into the deeper aspects of this, is to understand that when we're having a conversation, there's a lot of things going on that we can't see. So we effectively stand on a soapbox. That soapbox represents our reservoir of knowledge, our memories, our belief systems, the way we see the world. And as the person standing on the soapbox, we project that sits in our unconscious mind into the conversation and into the world. And anything that's coming into us, we also filter via all the information and the belief systems and the way we see the world that are in our soapbox. So it really provides the filters. And then if we look at information and meaning does not exist in a vacuum. So any fact, and these here are magnifying glasses. So when we look at any piece of information, that information is never on its own in a vacuum. It's always seen through all of our belief systems and what we believe to be true. So here, Jane, she knows about censorship. She knows about the conflicts of interest. She knows about these NGOs. She knows that science can be bought. She knows that government is a certain aspect. She knows the media is corporations. So she's seeing every fact through these filters, whereas Joe is seeing it through very different filters. So it ends up that this piece of information, fact or event, takes on a different meaning. And that's really the key. And then when we understand what's in this soapbox, and that's really going to be the primary of what we look at today, how do we build our soapbox? How do we make sense of the world? So then we go back to Joe's ancestors. And he would come out the cave and he would like, okay, I want to eat. And, you know, there's things that I need to avoid. So he's not going to touch fire. So he learns via pain and pleasure what feels good and what doesn't feel good, to then what happens is via all the learning conditioning, where to go. So we move towards pleasure away from pain. And then what we will do is we will learn very quickly, you know, if a tiger is dangerous or not. And we will then build memories. So next time we see this, we don't have to find out the hard way. So we're building up our memories, our story, our reservoirs, our beliefs, effectively what we call a map of reality. So then we have an option in this circumstance. Do we fight the tiger or do we run? And those that ran tend to fare better than those that fought the tiger, or certainly in those days. And then in today's world, we have to really remember that we have the same hardware. Our brain is effectively the same as, you know, many thousands of years ago. And modern society has changed so rapidly in such a short space of time that the brain itself is really coping to keep up with what we are, the way we're living. And I think that's clear from just really walking into a shopping mall. So then this question, and this is a very fascinating video. Excuse me. So if anyone hasn't watched Darren Brown, I highly recommend watching him, because he really, you know, via a very entertaining way will show you many aspects of behavior, belief systems, representation. And one thing here we're going to talk about is the importance of representation. Now, it's really, really simple. What we mean by representation is what is in that map. How do we represent a piece of knowledge? And in this particular video, Darren actually met this lady. He asked her the color of her car, and the car was parked in the car park. And then what he did was, via some manipulation and hypnosis, he actually had her think that yellow was green and red was black. So he switched the colors in her representation. And then she goes into the car park and she's like, well, that's my number plate, but that can't be my car because it's the wrong color. So how do we know anything? So we must represent it. And if that representation is not close to reality, that is when we get problems. So effectively, we have reality, and then we have the map of how we think reality is. And that's where the problems will come. The problems will come where we don't see things how they actually are. And of course, in today's world, there's so much science around understanding this that people can really manipulate how we see the world. And it's really the shadows on the wall is where the problems are. The problems lie in people's minds. Okay, so let's take a slightly deeper look, which we have to do in order to make sense of this, and really understand what we mean by the conscious and the unconscious mind. So effectively, the conscious mind, there should be a little man here. Oh, here he is. So the conscious mind, Joe, here is the rider, and the unconscious mind is the horse. Now, if you asked anyone that's been horse riding, who makes the decisions on where you go, is it the rider or is it the horse? And really, it's the horse. We are under the illusion that we have control, but when you look at so many of the behaviors that we do, for instance, and the easiest way to show this would be in a water phobia. So if somebody is scared of water, logically, they know that it's not going to harm them, but they wouldn't go in the water. And there's a very famous instance of that within NLT, with EFT. So in our awareness, we have the cognitive mind, we have certain emotions, you know, how we think, etc. But in the unconscious mind, we have all the memories, all the cognitive function, all these emotions, all these primal urges. And really our culture forms our operating system that sits in our unconscious mind. And just like a handshake, it's an automatic program. You don't think about moving your hand. When you've done something many times, it happens really automatically. So one thing that we'll touch on today, and I'm going to do a lot of presentation that's going forward because it's really key, is that in a lot of the world today, there's a big disconnect between the conscious and the unconscious mind. So what we think we would do and what we actually would do for a lot of people in the world are actually far different. So here's two examples. So there was a study that Cialdini referenced in his book, Science and Practice of Influence, where they asked a group of nurses, would you prescribe this cocktail of drugs to a patient? And I think it was something like 95% of them said, no, that's really a dangerous cocktail. Then they created a separate instance where they had a doctor phone up a nurse and said, oh, can you please prescribe this cocktail drugs to a patient? And almost, I think it was 90% of them went to do so. So what they said they would do and what they actually would do in the situation differed greatly. And then there's a number of studies around how people are influenced unconsciously. And there was one quite interesting study where they would play either French or German music, and then they would measure how much French or German wine was sold. And according to the music, there was a large increase in the sale of the wine that matched the music. But what was very interesting about this, when they asked the people afterwards, did the music affect your decision? People said no. So what you have is that when our unconscious mind is influenced without our conscious awareness, we then will often deny that we were influenced. And that's what really when Twain said it's easy to fool someone than convince them been fooled, that's what he was referring to. So effectively, what drives our behavior? What drives us to move? And really primarily it's emotions. And you can show this in really this example of spiders and plane phobias. People are moving away from something because of the fear. So these emotions are hardwired into us. Emotions and feelings are hardwired into us to get us to move. So they get us to move, they get us to propel us forward. So we will have these things within us to motivate us. So when it comes to eating, dopamine will motivate us to go and grab food. And then when it comes to moving away from things that might be dangerous or moving towards the things that we need, the emotions are in there as signposts. And this is where we get into a problem in today's world, because the signposts are not pointing to the right way. Now, what you'll have is that about 70% of the population will have a tendency to move away from things, and about 30% of people have a tendency to move towards things. And what we mean by this is that a lot of people will be strongly motivated by avoiding losses, and a lot of people will be strongly motivated by gaining things. And you would generally see which ones the people that will be doing, bungee jumps and air balloon rides will be the towards, and those that live very safe and secure will be the away from. So then when we see the towards, we see that we're really going to move to something that we want, so it may be chocolate or, many, many things that we're going to move towards that we wish to have, but it will be the emotions that will drive us forward. And emotions very often will distort reality and distort our perception of reality. And what they will also do is really override logic a lot of the time. So this is where, if you want to talk to someone about, wearing a mask, logic won't have hardly any effect if that person is, driven by emotion. And that's what we're finding, that someone could receive all the facts, but because if in the unconscious mind that fear is driving them, there's going to be this disconnect, and that's what usually triggers the dissonance with them. So yeah, we move towards things as well. So then what we do is we find ourselves in a situation where, Joe on the horse now, and the horse represents his unconscious mind, is gonna, move either away from this virus or move away from government overreach. And really for Joe, it's moving away from the virus. So the fear is driving him. It's a real big force to drive him forward. And of course, to comply, there'll be many other emotions such as guilt and shame, etc., to drive them up to that pathway of complying. And this non-comply route, as we've looked at a number of times, is painted with sludge. So really the key of what's driving the emotions, the key of what's driving the movement is the emotions. And obviously a lot of the time it's then logically rationalized, but you'll find that predominantly it's emotions that trigger all the decisions. Linda Cron showed this in her TED talk on stories and what drives us, in that when the part of the brain that's responsible for emotions is damaged, the person can stay just as intelligent, but their life will fall apart because they can't decide on things. They don't know what to do. And of course, as we've seen before, this really creates that divide and conquer. So then we get onto another interesting question here, which is really what drives the emotions. And really what we're seeing is that we've got this false fixes and substance versus trigger, which I'll explain in just a moment. And really the substance versus trigger, it's really this itch that you cannot scratch. And that's what you'll see with people. That's what's in this addictive nature. That's what's in people with 2, 3, 4, 5 masks, 2, 3, 4, 5 shots. Let's lock down harder. They can't ever satisfy this deep need to feel safe because they've had the shit scared out of them. And that primary trigger, which is the deep primary trigger that we have, is not being able to be met. So the way that we can really represent this very well is we're going to combine sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs here to look at this. But evolutionary speaking, we've got wants and we've got needs. And they tend to be governed by 2 different parts of the brain. And historically, it's never been a problem because what met the wants met the needs. Because we don't respond, and this is what we talk about with substance versus trigger. We don't respond to the whole because there's too much information. We respond to triggers. So when it comes to food, we're responding to the sugar and the fat, the things that tell us there's nutrition in there. So when you crave sugar, 100,000 years ago, you could only get fruits or vegetables. So when you got those, you met the need, which was nutrition. Now, the base layer is safety. In the organism, if a person doesn't feel safe, then nothing else works. And in hierarchy of needs, at the bottom, it had physiology, but I think safety is actually the really key thing when we look at how the brain works, particularly what they talk about, the reptilian brain part of the brainstem, that the person won't do anything in that brain part of the brain until they feel safe. Then what we have is that then there's this sort of future safe, which is then building, having a job and getting income so that we can provide, safety going forward. And then we get this love and belonging, which is really, we need to be part of groups. We need to belong. We need to be part of society, all these things. That's a big need in us. And then, of course, we've got this self-esteem that happens on a couple of different layers. This self-esteem, which is our reputation, how we're seen by others, which obviously, you know, there's a lot of this going on with people, how they want to be seen, but also this big part of us, how we want to see ourselves. How do we see ourselves? How is our self-image? We have a real deep need to see ourselves in a good, positive light. And this is where the ego starts to come in. And then as we scan up these levels, we can get to the point where we get to self-actualization. And what's really interesting about self-actualization is that when someone's truly in that, they're doing it for just that. They may be studying archery or whatever it is, but the self-actualization is to be a master of that. If they're doing it to be seen as the best master, then that's still in the self-esteem, that layer below, which is okay. But of course, the person that really loves mastery doesn't care what anyone thinks about them. They just want to master that thing. And that's really, really key. Now, what we find is that in modern society, we now, modern man and woman has found a way to provide the wants without the needs. So then what you're having is that you can get the dopamine hit that says that you've got something met, but it never meets your needs, if it makes sense. So when you look at this, the way that, society is functioning, society is in a largely addictive society, but it's unaware of it. So when you look at the things, the food, people are completely malnourished, but a lot of people are overweight. You've got, porn addictions, you've got drug addictions, you've got alcohol, all these things where people are craving something. And because of this miscommunication between the unconscious and the conscious mind, people think that that's being satisfied, or at least temporarily. So then what you see is this complete breaking away of the needs. And this is why once the people pushing the narrative triggered the deep safe need, but never met it, people pretty much are, almost an addiction to safety. And this is what we're seeing with safetyism, where everything's about keeping you safe now. And that's because people don't feel safe, because they've been so scared via the messaging, which is very, very effective. And it really is like, as we say here, it's this itch that you cannot scratch. So this really gets interesting when this comes from a body of work on behavior and needs, that there's really 5 things that we need as a human in slightly different model to the previous one. And we'll talk through them because you'll see how they map onto the pandemic. So this picture on the top left here, we have a need for social acceptance. So really to be seen in a good light. So this is where people want their trappings, where they want to have the profile pictures. I've had my XYZ, or I'm wearing a mask, or driving the right cars, and looking smart, all these things. So this need for social acceptance is kind of big. We also have a desire to belong to a group. And then you see how this group identity, the refuseniks and everything else, really played a major part. Now, there's a thing called social exclusion theory, which is one of the biggest fears that we have of being excluded from the groups. And I know that most people that have resisted and pushed against the narrative have really suffered in that respect. They've lost a lot of friends. They've been excluded from local games and clubs and all sorts of things. So you'll notice that by hitting these deep needs, most people really will cave in. Number 3 is we have a need to influence other people. This really is a need to make a difference, a need to positively influence people, to have an effect, to make a mark. And of course, people in groups, they love company, they want other people to join them. And of course, at the extreme, cult members are out to elicit people to join the same cult they are. So you'll see this. Number 4 is we have a tendency to protect ourselves against people that might harm us. So of course, anyone that's not following the narrative has been painted as someone that might harm you. So again, people will develop this, and we've talked about this, divide and conquer. And then 5, we have a strong inclination to establish intimate relationships. So again, that's been played on. So this is very key when we start to see that these needs drive the emotions, and the emotions really are the fuel for the person to motivate them to move and to do things. So now if we look at the false fixes again, and we think, okay, on the left will be a very balanced person that their wants meets their needs. They feel safe, they feel secure in the money they're earning, they belong, they have a belonging, see themselves in a positive light, the others see them in a positive light, and then they're able to practice on mastery. What happens when this completely breaks? Everything is about being safe. Nothing else really matters because the person does not feel safe. And that's why you've seen incredible behavior from people that are highly intellectual, because it's not a conscious decision. You don't decide to feel safe. You either feel safe or you don't. It's not that you sit there and consciously reason it. And because the techniques and the influences become so advanced, they can actually install a phobia relatively straightforward. And it's really inbuilt into our nature to move away from people that are ill, to be scared of germs. And when we look at, it doesn't make sense around snake phobias versus car, fear of being in a car crash. In the US, there's 30,000 deaths from car crashes each year, but yet 6 deaths from snake bites. And people are much more scared of snakes. So there's no logical reason there, but that's where the emotion really comes in. So if we now think, taking into consideration what we looked at, we have strong forces pushing us forward, which are really emotions and feelings, which are driven by needs and wants. And of course, we then have options in our life, and it's really the unconscious mind that's going to be the key pusher to take people down one of these pathways. And as we've pointed out, option one is usually the people pushing a narrative is to comply. So they will be messaging constantly to communicate with a person's unconscious mind. This is why logical reasoning really is having a very hard trouble working. It's because it's like a hypnotist. They talk directly to the unconscious mind. So the conscious mind won't always be aware of what's going on. So if the horse is scared of this, it's going to move up this one. So really, this is why stories, metaphor, and questions are so powerful, because they talk to the unconscious mind. That's why I'd pretty much given up trying to reason with anyone, particularly if they're being emotional. Logic does not work with anyone that's being emotional. Okay, so when we look at wear a mask, the person's moving away from, so there's many different reasons that someone will wear a mask. Let's just assume this person is wearing a mask because they're scared of a virus. People will wear a mask because they're scared of being confronted. They want to comply. They don't like confrontation, all of these different aspects, or they just want to be seen as part of the group. But if we take the person, and it could be many things, if we take the person that's just scared because of the virus and they think the mask will work, and then they've used all these, caring about other people, then they're going to wear a mask. Not wearing a mask, not so much now, but a long time ago, was really had a lot of negative emotions. There was a lot of sludge. You often couldn't go anywhere. But yeah, you'll see that how the emotions really impact the decision tree. So understand the meaning of behavior is complex, and we've really touched on it today at sort of macro level, hopefully to give you to see the forces driving behavior, which are emotions, and the things driving emotions are really these not wants and needs at the deep level. And it's at this high level understanding will provide many answers to why people act the way they do. And this is, one in a series of conversations about this. And it will also provide us with information to know which messages will have a positive effect. As we saw in the messaging presentation, there's 4 emotions, which one group now got 20 billion page hits with 4 emotions. And they were history or nostalgia, comedy, pride of knowing, and schadenfreude. And they are in the powerful messaging presentation. But then when you're messaging, people respond to emotion. They do not respond to just pure logic. It doesn't make any sense to them. Okay, so all the Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there's many videos on the website. If you would like to support us, you can do so here. We have some interesting project news coming up. So, my intention is to just get all this information out there and help as many people as we can. Obviously, in trying to sustain things, we're very grateful. There's been some lovely donations this week that's allowed, really for us to get on this Brazil trip. We do have some paid events, but they're very, very lowly priced just to allow people to do that. That's really for all the general public, but these will all stay free, Thursdays, Tuesdays, and all the videos on the website. And here's the Doctors for Life presentation conference that's going on in Brazil. which I will be going out to on Monday. As you, hopefully you can see those speakers. There's a lot of wonderful speakers speaking there. And I do believe there's 15,000 doctors in that alliance. So yes, some very interesting things happening now. So I will open it up for a Q&A.